Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've got the opportunity to talk with Gary Figg, our Senior Services Architect from our UK office. He's going to talk about a PWP or Packaged Work Product add-on for CA Single Sign-On called Limit Concurrent Login. So instead of me going on about technical things that I'm not that bright about, I'd like to turn it over to Gary.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, everyone. Just give you a quick overview of what we're going to go through today. So kick off with that brief introduction about me, and then we'll talk about what the drivers are for why you want to limit concurrent logins on your web applications or your systems. Then we're going to talk about how the Limit Concurrent Login module actually works, what use case it supports, so whether that be limiting to a single active session or to limiting to a number of active sessions. We'll see how that works. Next, we're going to talk about the architecture of the module, so what additional components you're going to need to install, how it's configured, and then finally we're going to talk about the dependencies, so what versions of software, operating systems, etc. that you need, and what other things you need to configure in your infrastructure. So a bit about me. I'm a Senior Services Architect in CA Technology, so I've been with CA for quite a few years now. So prior to CA, I worked for Integrity. So as probably quite a few of you know, Integrity is the company that produced SiteMinder, which is now CA SSO. So I've been working with the product for quite some time, not exclusively, but during my time I've been an architect, consultant, and also a member of the custom engineering team that at one time produced this module, and a number of other of the package work products, which you can get for CA SSO and other CA products. So that's a bit about me. So think about why we want to restrict concurrent access. So I've talked to quite a few people about this, but a lot of them say, well, why do I want to restrict this? I want to allow access to my applications from all my customers, from as many different devices, platforms, etc. as I want. And then you get thinking, well, okay, that's fair enough, but how many is too many, and when does too many kind of indicate that something maybe risky is occurring? So I don't know. Let's say you've got 5 concurrent accesses. Is that a reasonable thing for your application? Or maybe if your user's got five devices, which is not uncommon, then yes, you want to allow them to access potentially concurrently across those 5 devices. What about 10 concurrent sessions? Well, again, there may be someone out there which has more devices than most, or maybe a household. So again, maybe not that uncommon, but maybe something to worry about. When that figure gets up to say 50 or 100, then that kind of indicates that something is maybe not as it should be. And also depending upon the application as well, or the infrastructure, your environment, you may think that actually 2 concurrent sessions is something to worry about. Maybe your infrastructure is such that it should be impossible for someone to log in, so that may indicate something. So what risks could these multiple sessions indicate? So the first one we've got here is a stolen session. So potentially if there's 2 active sessions and we think that a user or a user only had 1 active session at once, then that means that someone has stolen the session and something potentially bad could happen. So an attacker's got a session and they can do things in the name of that user until that session is expired. So you want to limit the risk of that happening or the damage that could occur. The second is credential sharing or collusion. So you may have someone that's distributed their credentials to other people, and they may have found some sort of exploit whereby if they use an application with 2 different sessions, and they can bypass some sort of control and get a level of access that they would otherwise not be able to have, and cause damage that way. Multiple sessions may also indicate that your users are violating their license or the terms of usage of your application. So if you've got some premium content which you want to restrict to, say, three concurrent sessions, and you see that there's one guy and he's got 100 concurrent sessions, then there's obviously some license revenue that you're potentially missing out on there, and also this guy's probably using up more resources on your infrastructure than you would like. There's potentially also some compliance violations that this would indicate as well. And finally, if you've got lots of concurrent sessions for a user, it potentially could start to degrade performance. So what you don't want is lots of kind of dead sessions hanging around eating up resources. So you'd want to kind of control that as much as you can. So that's a bit about the risks that multiple concurrent logins could indicate. So I'm next going to talk about how the Limit Concurrent Login module can help. So the module essentially provides two different use cases. So the first one is it will restrict a user to a single active session. So the most recent login would win, and the previous login would no longer be able to access. And the second is where you would allow users multiple concurrent logins up to a certain number. So let's see how these two work. So the case where we're only allowing a single session is kind of fairly straightforward, but sometimes when we explain this to people, they think, well, hang on, this isn't actually stopping people from logging in. But we'll see why this is probably a preferred way of doing it in a second. So the first step is when a user tries to access the system and they don't have an active session already. So what happens is the user requests a protected resource. They will be prompted for credentials. The credential that will be validated, and then the module would then record the session ID against the user profile. So there's an attribute in the user's profile that we need to use to store that session ID, and then the user will then go ahead and access the resource. So when another user or the same user tries to access again, and there's an existing active session, then again they would request a protected resource. They would be prompted for their credentials, log in, and now the module would then detect that there's an existing active session against the user's profile. The module would then log out the active session, record the new session against the user's profile, and allow the user to access the resource. if the user tries to use the previous session ID, then the module would then block that access. So what this allows is a case where, say, someone has logged into a system at work and they've forgotten to log off, so that the session is still active. They're on their way home, they still want to access this application. So say they're logging from their phone, but they're not actually prevented from logging in. They can still log in, but as they're logging in, their existing session is going to be logged out. So the second use case is where we want to allow multiple concurrent logins for a single user up to a limit. So it's very similar to the first one. So with no active session, the user logs in and the new session is recorded against the user's profile as before, and the user accesses the resource. If the user logs in and there is active sessions, then the number of active sessions is checked against either a global parameter, so you can set it at a global level, or you can designate a user attribute to hold the number of active sessions that that particular user can have. So when there's less than the maximum number of sessions, then as the user is logging in, the module then adds the new active session to the list of active sessions against the user's profile and allows the user to log in. Now, when the user tries to log in when they've already hit their maximum active sessions, then what we can do is optionally we can redirect the user to a page which says, hang on, by continuing, you're going to actually kick out one of your existing sessions. Do you want to continue, yes or no? If they want to proceed, then the module is then going to log out the oldest active session, and it's then going to record the new session against the user's profile appended to the list. The user then accesses the resources before. If he tries to use the session which was logged off, then he's going to be blocked from accessing it. The policy will basically stop that access from happening. And also, if that does occur, then we can also inform the user as to why they're no longer able to access that particular session. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about the architecture of the module. So what additional pieces that we need to install and configure. So on the SSO policy server side, there's a couple of libraries which need to be installed on your policy server. One is custom authentication scheme and active response, and the other is tunnel service. So the custom authentication scheme that comes with LCL is kind of acts as a shim or a wedge. So it kind of acts as a proxy between it and your target authentication scheme. So if you've got existing authentication schemes defined and working, then to use it with the Limit Concurrent Login module, you just have to change the library and then point the LCL library at the authentication scheme and parameters you used before. So the custom authentication scheme is essentially implements the logic of reading and updating the sessions as the user's logging in. The tunnel service that provides some services for the page that would prompt the user to, if they wanted to proceed to log out session or not when they're logging in. Also on the policy server, there's a configuration file So this contains configuration for whether to warn the users who are logging in if they've reached the maximum sessions or not, and which URL to redirect them to if that is the case. If you're wanting to do limit sessions on a global basis, then what that number is. The session purge time. So basically, as you're logging out sessions, then the policy server is going to invalidate the existing authorizations for resources. So this is how often that's going to occur. There's also the settings for which user attribute to use for the maximum number of sessions for that particular user. Also in the module, there's a couple of JSPs. So that this is what I was talking before about when you're prompting the user. So this is to say, well, okay, do you want to continue or do you want to log out that particular session? So these can obviously be branded to whatever design that you want. They also contain some settings as to where the tunnel service is on the policy server, so that it can actually log out the sessions and provide information about what sessions there are. So on the user profile side, we need one or two attributes to be defined there. So one would be which attribute to store the active sessions in, and the other one would be which attribute to use for defining what the maximum number of sessions is for that particular user. To configure this in the policy store, as I mentioned earlier, when you're defining the authentication scheme, it's really converting your existing authentication scheme to use the wedge, and then providing your existing parameters to the authentication scheme. There's also the on-auth accept rules and some active responses that need to be set up. So these are to control access to resources based on the sessions that are defined in the user's profile. So we only want to authorize access based on those valid session IDs that we've stored against the user. And finally, there's an SCC file which is there for gathering credentials after the maximum number of sessions has been reached. So this slide is really about the dependencies for the LCL module. So the module is supported for both SSO Policy Server 12.6 and 12.7 on Windows 2012, Red Hat 6 and Red Hat 7. If you're using the prompt to say whether the user wants to log out an existing session or not, then you're going to need an application server serving JSPs. That can be kind of any application server. I mean, it's going to use the SSO SDK to call back to the policy server, which would work essentially on any application server. On the user store side, as mentioned before, it's just an additional two attributes. It could be an LDAP store, it could be a database user store, and any supported web agent, and that's essentially what your dependencies are. So that's brought us to the end of this section on the Limit Concurrent Login module. Now I'm going to see if we've got any questions from those that have joined.
Yeah, folks, you can ask a question in the Q&A, and I do think Well, there was one question in there that Jerry already answered. So you can ask a question in the Q&A tab. Just go ahead and make sure that you ask it of everyone so that we'll be able to see it.
And Gary, I'm just going to add one other, this is Sid Mahdi, I'm just going to add one other prerequisite sort of on the configurations. There are a couple of features within CA single sign-on that are not compatible with this module, so it's important to know that up front. If your organization is using either directory mapping or authentication validation, the auth validate mapping, those features are not compatible with this because of its usage of the user store and the fact that the user store context is switching when using those features of CA single sign-on. So that's just something to be aware of and understand in terms of making the criteria for utilization.
Thanks for that.
Hi, thanks, Gary. Evan Pratt from Wells Fargo. We have called for this product from our business partners occasionally. More recently, we have more requests, but we can't do it because of an architecture consideration. The users are in AD, and our AD group is separate from our group, and they don't want to do any schema changes to allow to add an attribute. Okay. So I guess our request is to be able to store the information in the session server, which we do use across the enterprise. The other issue, a particular user, can have access to different applications in different domains. So we would also need it to be more fine-grained. Like in domain A, the user could have 3 sessions. Domain B, they'd only be limited to 1, et cetera. We need fine-grained access per user, depending on which domain they're in.
Okay, so to your first point, the module uses the user store rather than the session store to write that information. I don't know if you considered using one of the kind of existing AD attributes for the purpose of Limit Concurrent Login module. I know there's a few which are kind of reserved in Active Directory which you can use without actually extending the schema. I don't know if that's something that you've considered.
That was the first thing that I asked of management, and in their experience with working with the AD group, they don't extend schema or repurpose attributes.
Okay.
But yeah, I asked that very question.
Okay. So in terms of your second question, in order to make it more kind of fine-grained, so there's nothing really stopping you from defining different authentication schemes and different rules and responses so that you can actually limit concurrent login to, say, different applications. So maybe some you don't want to limit concurrent login at all. Others you can restrict using one set of attributes, and another you could restrict using another. So you could kind of split it up that way.
Okay, great. So I could just create multiple authentication schemes. One would be, one would be 2, limit to 2, and the third one limit to 3. Okay.
Yeah, you still need to kind of be careful as to what attributes that you are using for those. So that, I mean, in that scenario, I think you would have separate sessions or separate maximum sessions for each. So you.
Okay, so we'd have to use.
If it's going to meet particular requirements, but you can certainly configure it individually on a kind of per application basis.
Okay, so I'm getting that we'd have to use, if we had 3 different levels of concurrency, we'd have to have 3 different attributes per user?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we can repurpose attributes or extend schema. So, you know, if we could do everything in the session store, you know, we could use it. But yeah, I'll bring it back to management, you know, for the repurposing of attributes question.
It's probably something we can raise as an idea, and maybe Sid can take it away for consideration, whether we can actually use the session store in future for this or not, for this very purpose.
Yeah. We have evaluated. Okay. We have evaluated the capability of leveraging the session store. The module was designed before CA single sign-on, or back then, you know, its former product name. SiteMinder it was designed before a session store existed, hence why it's architected the way it is. But yes, we are aware that we could redesign this to use a session store, and it just hasn't been a major requested item at this time. But I definitely have noted it down. Your request.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we've been looking at this product, you know, way before CA Directory, but we've been using you know, Oracle Directory before CA Directory. So yeah, we understand the timeline of the product.
Great. I hope your question was answered properly, and it sounded like it was. So Gary, there's a few others that came in on the Q&A chat. One is LCL an extra cost? I believe we've addressed that, and the answer is yes. The follow-up to that is, would the LCL custom auth scheme work in SAML/SP flow?
So this is, I can take that if you want, Gary.
Okay, go ahead.
The only flow that LCL would really be participating in from a single sign-on would be in the IDP flow, where an authentication event is triggered within SSO, not on the SP side of the flow. So on the SP side of the flow, you're basically just trusting the federation coming in and accepting it, and you're not really tracking that there from that perspective. So as this is tracking, it's tracking through the IDP side.
Yeah, so as you're authenticating and trying to access
Correct.
service providers, then it would limit the amount of concurrent logins that you could do for that. But if you are protecting your services with SSO and people are federating in, then it wouldn't be involved.
Thanks, Gary. Another question's come in that asks, what would be the time and effort to implement the module?
Well, this this really depends on what you want to achieve with the module, and kind of how many environments, applications, and things that you actually want to bring under the control of the module. But if you kind of consider that, let's say we've got 2 or 3 applications that we want to limit concurrent logins for, and you've got say 3 environments: a development, a test, and a production environment, then it's a fairly straightforward thing to kind of set up and test. It does place some kind of additional load on your user store and also on your policy store for when it's flushing all of the authorizations for previous or inactive sessions. So once you've kind of configured the functionality and got the flow working to your liking, then obviously there's going to be some additional testing you need to do. But I would have thought that in terms of effort, it will be weeks rather than months. So, I mean, you've just seen the things that need to be installed there. It's not a huge amount of things to install. The configuration is also fairly straightforward. It's then what kind of level of testing and regression testing that you would want to do on top of that.
Generally, you need about, a half a day to figure out what your business alignment is to your use cases for your methods. So the product is configurable in a couple of different methodologies. After that, setting up a development environment with a single use case and getting that up and running is a matter of maybe about 2 or 3 days worth of work just to set up your first use case in your dev environment. So, as Gary said, it's not truly onerous. You typically can have your dev environment up and running and configured with this inside of a week.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Gary and Sid. So there's one other question in the chat window. Will LCL be built into or better integrated into future versions of CA SSO?
I think that's probably a question that we'll have to take away to product management, unless Sid, you're privy to any other information around the module.
I'm not privy to it being a part of the product roadmap at this time. We have been certifying this module with each of the releases of CA Single Sign-On as they've been coming out, and within the next 2 weeks we should even be having a roadmap published that will include this module for the next release of CA SSO 12.8. So as of right now, at least through the 12.8, I can speak towards it being separate as a services module still.
Jamie, I hope that was a sufficient answer. If you've got any further questions that you think we could help you out with on LCL, reach out directly to Gary, gary.figg@ca.com, or myself, jerry.auble@ca.com. Be happy to get you to the right folks to discuss that any further. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions in the Q&A. Gary, would you like to just make a final comment?
Yeah, thank you all for taking the time to join this WebEx. Hopefully it's been useful. And as Jerry says, if you've got any follow-up questions or queries, then reach out to myself or post the CA Community's website, and we can answer your questions there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for attending. This will be recorded, and the recording will be placed on the community's website. We do encourage you to visit the communities often for other interesting events and discussion amongst your peers. And we do appreciate you attending. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.